introduction, I want to set the scene and give us some context for today. And then we're going to kind of get into our session. And as you know, these are 45-minute sessions, so they're pretty high impact. We move through things quite quickly. The goal is not to touch on every point, but in many ways, the goal is to kickstart a conversation for either you to have with your team or to kickstart a conversation for you to have with yourself in terms of your personal growth and development. So just to say who we are, because we realize that there are a few people that come to these webinars that actually haven't heard of us, in the sense that we're not one of their clients, or they're not one of our clients. We haven't worked with their teams, and we haven't even done a strengths assessment with them. So for those that don't know who we are, we're Organizational Health Solutions. And essentially, if I had to summarize what we do, or our passion is, we try create workspaces where employees love to give their best. Simply put, we're creating spaces where employees feel understood, feel engaged, feel as though they're correctly positioned, or well led. And so essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to create high performing environments by creating environments where employees love their work. And one of the ways we do that is through the Clifton Strengths tool. And so Clifton Strengths is a profiling assessment, which I'm sure 90% of you probably have done. It's by Gallup. And we use the Clifton Strengths assessment in our development of teams and culture, because what the Clifton Strengths assessment measures is your behavior. It measures what comes naturally to you. What do you just do naturally? It doesn't take effort. It doesn't take learning. It's just a naturally recurring pattern of thought, feeling, or behavior. And so that's the tool we use in terms of our development of teams. And so that's a little bit about who we are. Just so you know, my name's Caleb, if I've never met you. And I'm going to be sharing with us today on the shadows your strengths cast. And I'm going to explain in a moment what we mean by that. But essentially, the short version is we want to help you today kickstart a self-awareness journey. Today is not going to be as solution-orientated. So you're going to leave probably a bit frustrated today in many ways, because we're going to give you some tools to assess yourself in terms of your leadership, or even just your interaction with your team members and your personal development. And essentially what we're talking about is understanding what is tripping you up the most. What's tripping you up the most? What's tripping your team up the most? And particularly, how does that connect to strengths? So that's what we're speaking about today. So let me explain strengths quickly, just so we understand the context for this conversation. So as I mentioned, a strength is a naturally recurring pattern of thought, feeling, or behavior. So I'm going to use a very practical example. I have what they call discipline as a strength, which means I'm highly structured. I'm incredibly organized. I think and process my life through efficiency. And so that's a naturally recurring kind of behavior. No one has to kind of tell me to do that or convince me that it's the most productive way of living. It's just the way I'm wired. And so that's a strength. And the strengths test or assessment has 34 of these different behaviors or terms that describe behavior. And you'll see here, just to kind of help you better understand strength, I've spoken about this in previous sessions. And if we've got involved with your business or team, you would have seen the slide. But essentially, a strength is something that you have natural energy to do. So there's a sense of excitement when you do it. It's who you are. So I'll give you another example. If you've got positivity as a strength, it just means that you have a positive outlook on life. The glass is half full. We can do this. Team unity, everyone working together. That comes naturally to you. That way of thinking, that way of perceiving the world comes naturally to you. So there's a sense of energy. There's a sense of need as well, in that when you are able to express that strength, you feel satisfied. There's a sense of sustainability in that you can do it on an ongoing basis. So to give you an example of the opposite of that, empathy is one of my bottom strengths. And empathy means people with empathy generally are very empathetic. They feel people's emotions. So if I told you that I'm dealing with something very heavy in my personal life, you would probably feel that very deeply. And you may even cry with me or carry my burden with me in a very deep way. And so that is my 33rd, I think it is, strength, which means that if I had to have many conversations in a week with that are very emotionally charged, or people, sharing their burdens, I'd probably be burnt out by day 3. That's because I don't have endurance in that strength, whereas someone with empathy would be able to have that conversation pretty much every day of the week, and they'd love it. And then the last one is contribution. They add natural value. So that's kind of a description of these strengths. So you can see it's very positive when we use this in the context of a team. And that's why we always say Clifton Strengths is built on positive psychology. A guy named Don Clifton, who is the creator of the Clifton Strengths assessment, he rooted this tool in positive psychology. And just to explain what positive psychology in very simple terms, Albert Einstein said this. He said, everyone's a genius, but when you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. So what is he saying? He's saying that some of us are great at climbing trees, and some of us are great at swimming, and others are great at running. We all have a different skill set, a natural ability that forms part of our core wiring. But as soon as you start to judge a person for not having your core wiring, they will look stupid to you. So I'm incredibly organized. And you'll hear in a moment, my sister, who's co-founder with me in this business, she is not as organized. She doesn't have the strength of discipline like I do. And what that simply means is, if I'm not careful, I could be inclined to judge her because she's not as organized, as efficient as me. But there's a whole bunch of other strengths that she is brilliant at. And so positive psychology is embracing that difference instead of letting that difference cause conflict and frustration. It's embracing and celebrating the differences in your team, in your family, whatever context you're using strengths in. So that's the positive side of strengths. And you can see it's very positive. But as you know, today is around the shadows your strengths cast. And the reality with Clifton Strengths is, even though you have strengths that, Gallup gave you or you originally had, but they were able to identify them, that doesn't mean you're perfect. And you don't have to worry. You can go ask anyone you work with, or a friend, a spouse, whoever it is, they'll affirm this truth, that you're probably not as perfect as you think you are. And I say that because actually, when we think of imperfection, there's 2 aspects. There's what you don't have, and then there's what you do have that's been mismanaged. So for example, I don't have empathy. Okay, so there's a weakness in that. I struggle with empathy, but there's other things I do have. But even in the things I have, there's a potential for detriment. There's a potential for mismanagement, and that is the shadow. So you'll see on the screen, it's not the absence of strengths that trips people up the most. What trips people up the most is the mismanagement of what they do have, the mismanagement of their current reality, of their natural ability. And so mismanaged strengths actually are shadows. It's the shadows that your strengths cast. And what we found as we worked with teams and as we've worked with both leaders and just general employees is that the root of conflict, the root of frustration, the root of low performance in team often isn't because someone is unable to do something. It's because that one of their strengths has been overutilized or it's been overextended. And so it has a detrimental effect on the team. And what I want to do for the remaining of our session today is I want to give you a real close-up practical snapshot of what it looks like when your strengths cast shadows. What does that practically look like? And the way we're going to do that is quite interactive. I'm going to share some of the shadows that my strengths cast. I've asked a few of my colleagues to share theirs. And then we're going to go through kind of the most common examples of when strengths have shadows and what that looks like. We're not going to get through all the strengths, so you might find that your strength is not mentioned. But today is not necessarily about finding solutions for these challenges. Today is all about self-awareness. The first step in change is being able to identify what needs to change in your personal life or in your work life or in your leadership life. And so today is really about getting you to think about what is it What are your strengths that are potentially being mismanaged and that are casting shadows on the people you work with? All right. So self-awareness. So I'm going to start with myself, as I mentioned, and I want to just point out two strengths that for me personally cast a shadow. And the first one is focus. So focus, remember all of these strengths, the reason they're called strengths is that they're positive. So we celebrate them. And the celebration of focus is that you are incredibly detail orientated. So I'm very detailed. I'm very perfectionistic. I have the ability to work on something for a long period of time until it's finished to the end. And so there's an element of endurance. But here's the shadow. And if you come chat to anyone on my team, they'll tell you the levels of frustration that they sense when this strength is mismanaged. And the shadow is being overly perfectionistic. So down to the silliest little things. I can't even tell you guys how silly sometimes, like on our website, I'm constantly looking at our website to work out what needs to move slightly. Or Vessel, who I'm sure all of you know, Vessel will often send me email to check. And I mean, it'll be little changes that actually they don't need to be corrected in the long or in the bigger picture, but I have to correct them because it's not 100% perfect. And it even comes down to, Georgia on our team. She's a brilliant designer. That's what she also does as part of the OHS team. And so we often designing things for promotions or whatever it may be. And I will move things around all the time and it will frustrate the heck out of her. Normally it's supposed to go back and forth about 2 times. In our team, it's about 6 to 8 times. And so what it does is the shadow it casts is it slows the team down quite a bit. And I'm aware of that. And we're working on that, but it can slow the team down. The other thing is that it can frustrate the team, because if I'm giving my team constant feedback of things that they're not doing at 100%, they're going to consistently feel inadequate. And it's actually going to damage their morale in the team. And so that's focus and the shadow that it casts. You can see there's a strength element, but there's also a serious shadow to that strength. The second one I want to share with you, and then I'll ask my colleagues to share, starting with Brad. But the second one is responsibility. And responsibility is a very common strength. I'm sure many of you have it. It's the strength that focuses on ownership. So when you give someone with responsibility a task, they own it as if it was their own. They take on the ownership. You don't have to follow up or check in or remind them. They are going to get it done, and they get it done to the same level at which you would have wanted it done yourself. So there's great strength with responsibility. You can trust these teammates. Here's the challenge with responsibility. Here's the shadow. If someone with responsibility is not careful, they can become the worst micromanagers in the team. And what's ironic about responsibility is that they hate being micromanaged themselves because they know they have the ability to do it. They don't need to be reminded, don't talk to me about it. I know what needs to happen and I know I'll get it done on time. But they themselves are the worst micromanagers because they genuinely struggle to trust their team. They constantly remind, hey, don't forget about that thing on Monday. And, are you sure you've got that? I'm, relying on you. And it's reminding, and it's micromanaging, and it's even stepping in when things are not done quite to that, extent that you would have wanted it done. So there can be a large amount of micromanagement. This is especially true if someone has responsibility and they're in a leadership role. It can be incredibly frustrating for those in the team. The other thing with responsibility is that they like to have a handle on everything in the business or the team, everything that's happening. They want their kind of finger in the pie so that they know that it's going to happen. And obviously the challenge with that is that basically team members struggle to follow that leader because they're feeling like they're not trusted. There's an element that their leader doesn't seem to release them or empower them. And so there's this constant kind of checking in and micromanagement. And I find this to be true in my own leadership in pretty much all the spheres of my life. So that's responsibility. That's the shadow. Maybe this is ringing true for you. If it is, make a note. But I'm going to hand over to Brad, and maybe Brad, I wonder if I should stop screen sharing. Actually, Brad, why don't you just share? I'll leave this on the screen. But maybe Brad can unmute his mic, and then Vessel, and then Georgia, and they're going to share 1 or 2 real life examples of shadows their strengths cast. Go for it, guys.
Right. Thanks, Caleb. Hello, everybody. Nice to be with all of you again. Yeah, so for me, the shadow that I want to share with you is definitely been something that I've had to work on a lot, is around my theme of positivity. Now, I know what you're thinking. How can positivity possibly have any shadow? Because, you know, it's just so positive. But there is a shadow to it. The beauty of positivity is that it's always seeing the good in something. It's always bringing lots of energy and enthusiasm and fun and laughter into whatever context I find myself in. And that's the beauty of the theme of this talent and the strength. But the dark side is, the shadow side is that that sometimes it blinds me to see the challenges or the problems that are at hand. And that's actually incredibly disempowering for the people that I'm trying to lead or the people that I'm trying to work with. So, for example, once there was a lady on my team that was really struggling in her role. And she was coming to me basically right at the end of all of her resources and reserves. And she was wanting to step out of her role. And she came to me and she was saying, Brad, this is so hard. I can't do this anymore. My positivity, though, because of my positivity, I struggled to see how serious the challenge was for her. And so I was like, no, it'll be fine. We just changed this. Let's get you a bit of help there. Let's try and make things a bit better. I'm sure everything's going to be great. And it actually took me a few weeks to realize that, shame, she was really trying to resign from her role and step out. But my positivity was casting such a shadow, I couldn't see it. And so I've had to learn how to manage that by asking other people around me to be a bit of a gauge on whether my positivity is turned up too loud or turned up too much, so that I'm not seeing some of the struggle and the strain that is the reality that people are living in around me. And that way I'm trying more and more not to disempower people by being overly positive, because it's not helpful for the teams I lead. That's my positivity. I could go with the others, but let's just leave it there.
Great. Awesome, Brad. Vessel, do you want to share yours?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So the one that I'd like to share today is my strength of adaptability. Now, adaptability, you know, when well managed, it really allows me to be very reactive to the needs of my team, and also to the need of our clients, to really be able to in the moment be quite, very present, especially when things are quite heated or quite pressurized. But what this also means is that it also makes me like the ultimate procrastinator. And the shadow that this casts, not only for my team, but over me at times, is the fact that, creating unnecessary pressure. So adaptability, they like pressure, and they'll create it for themselves by kind of putting things out, 1 or 2 days, or, I can do it tomorrow kind of thing. And the shadow that comes with that is the shadow of unnecessary pressure, and even the shadow of delay for my team and for myself. So yeah, short and sweet from my side, but yeah, that's my adaptability. Great.
Georgia.
Hi everyone, my name is Georgia and I'm a coach here at Organizational Health Solutions. And the talent that I want to talk to you guys today about is my talent of communication. Now, the shadows that my talent of communication casts often involves me over-explaining something or repeating myself frequently to the point of confusion for my team. I often will get sidetracked on a point and then lose the essence and the concentrated point that I want to bring across. So it gets completely diluted. And that's often what I struggle with when it comes to my communication. Another thing that I struggle with is actually creating clarity on assignment of tasks or clarity on projects. And so my team can be sometimes quite frustrated, but I can slow them down because they have to ask me numerous amount of questions instead of just me giving one point that will answer all their questions. I leave it quite open-ended, and so they have to come back to me frequently to clarify what exactly I meant. And so my communication, however, it can be positive. You can't get mixed up with communication and the skill of communicating, because those two things go separately. But it is a talent, and I'm working on the shadow side of things every day.
Right. Okay. So there's some real life examples, and yeah, I hope that's helpful with regards to understanding, I think, some of the reality when it comes to the fact that actually it doesn't matter what strengths you have, we all have struggles. We all have the challenge of managing our strengths. So I want to continue the conversation. Before I dive into what you'll see on the screen, there's just to say, I'm sure you can relate to particularly leaders. It's quite interesting when it comes to the shadows that strengths cast. It's amplified when you're in a leadership role. So if you're part of a team and you know you've got some strengths that are being mismanaged and there's shadows being cast, the surface area, so to speak, of your shadow is smaller because you're not in a leadership role. There isn't necessarily people underneath you. Versus when you're in a leadership role, it's even more important to become aware of the shadows your strengths are casting, because you're casting your shadow on a larger portion of people. And so basically, I'm sure you can relate to stories like the leader that consistently changes their mind, or the leader that cuts across certain people or teams and makes a call on their own, or the leader that's highly perfectionistic, or the leader that comes up with ideas all the time and the team can't even keep up with all the ideas on the table, or the leader that wants to get stuff done as quickly as possible, and there's a pace and a speed that's needed, and the team kind of feels like they're always running at 100 kilometers an hour. All of those examples are shadows. They're shadows that people or leaders need to become aware of. So let's go through a few examples. We've got 20 minutes left. I want to touch on a few practical strengths, and some of these you might have. Sorry, I'm just quickly moving my little cursor. I'm not sure what you guys can see on the screen. There we go. Okay, so achiever. So the main thing with the achiever when it comes to the shadow of achiever, remember the well-managed aspect. These are the people that set goals and they make lists, and every day starts from zero and they get a lot done. There's a sense of drive and ambition. The mismanagement of achiever is the shadow they cast is that they actually can sometimes make people feel inadequate, or they can judge people as being lazy, because these people run pretty hard and their pace is quite fast. Anyone that isn't as fast paced as them, they're probably going to struggle to work with, and particularly they're probably going to judge them as being either not as hardworking or not as competent. And so already there, you've got a shadow element where you've got one person with an incredible strength, they're moving forward, they're ambitious, but you've got an element where someone on their team is very different to them. Let's say they're highly relational and there's a clash. And the achiever has to be incredibly careful when it comes to their strength, not projecting their pace, not projecting their way of achieving or executing onto the person without achiever. And so the shadow could be judgment. The shadow could be inadequacy. I think of another shadow just in my own life. One of my challenges is that I struggle to draw kind of a finish line for my life in terms of like when I finish the day's work, because, you know, until the list is done, it feels like I can't really rest. And the shadow that casts is on my family, because I then don't switch off. 5 o'clock comes, 6 o'clock comes, and I'm still working. I'm still trying to tick the boxes or close the windows to kind of figure out or close those things so that I can move on with my day. And so the shadow is overworking, and it's shadow over my family. So that's achiever. Maybe that rings true for you. Belief is the next strength. Also executing domain. Achiever, you'll see all these red, the red color is the executing domain. Belief is a very interesting one. These people are driven by their values. They are driven by essentially a sense of moral compass. There's a sense of value. There's a sense of conviction. And what's very interesting about belief is that when someone has a different value or a different conviction, they will really struggle to follow that person down that road, or they'll really struggle to give themselves to that task. And so there's a shadow of stubbornness. And it becomes very difficult when you're a team leader and someone on your team has belief and they're not actually verbally, they're all good. But when it comes to actually following the leader in terms of what the leader set out, they're not as committed because they don't see the value, or they don't see or understand the why. So there's another shadow. The shadow is being cast on the team because they're holding the team back. There can also be an element of stubbornness. So anything like that is a shadow, and you need to become aware of what is the shadow for you. If you are value driven, if you find yourself quite stubborn at times with kind of your own conviction and your own mind, kind of your own way of things, you've got to ask yourself, who is this affecting? What sort of shadow is this casting, and what are the ramifications of that? Responsibility is the next strength. And obviously, all these things, there's a positive aspect. I spoke about that earlier. We're talking about the shadows, and I spoke about responsibility with regards to micromanagement, but I'll just touch on it again. The shadow, another shadow that responsibility can cast, is their view of people. They can start to see people as not as dependable or trustworthy. As soon as someone lets them down, as soon as someone doesn't do what was requested on time or at the right level or standard, these people can really struggle to trust that person again. They'll rather do it themselves or give it a shot with another person. And that's a shadow. It's a shadow, especially if you're working in the context of a team. If you're a solo player, and you're working by yourself, it's less affected, or it's got a lesser impact. But as soon as you're in the context of a team and you start to see certain team members as, not dependable or not trustworthy, that's a shadow that you're beginning to cast, and it impacts the performance of the team. And so that's something you want to be aware of. Let's move on to activator. So activator is influencing. So I've worked with a number of CEOs and managers that have activator. Activator is essentially, the strength of it is they start things, they pioneer, they're kind of impatient. They often say to themselves, oh, when can I start? Like, let's do this and let's do it quickly. The shadow is that they may jump the gun, in that they may not consult everyone that needs to be consulted before they just dive into it, because they're so caught up on trying to get it done quickly that they don't always follow the correct process, include the right people, gather the right information, make an informed decision. So that's a shadow that affects the team in a real way. I've seen it countless times where leaders are making decisions and the team only gets notified after the decision has been made. And everyone's, kind of like, what the heck? I thought we were a team. I thought we were supposed to consult each other. And that's because the activator, whoever has that activator and whoever made the decisions, mismanaged their talent. And so it's cast now a shadow over the team. The other aspect of activator when it comes to shadows is that they're great at starting things, but they're not that great at finishing things well. They don't finish it to the nth degree. So the shadow that causes is that the team often can change direction and they never get to the end destination. And that can also frustrate team members. So you can see all these strengths, well managed and mismanaged, the light, the shadow. Command, this is a very interesting one. So command is these people take charge and they take control. They're kind of the first people to step up. They say it as it is. They're quite strong in their personality generally. And it's great when no one's kind of, willing to take initiative or willing to take leadership. It's great when, a gap needs to be filled. But it can get very complex when there's sensitive people on the team. And I say that because command often enjoys conflict. And there's space for that, but there's also a challenge in that the shadow of that is that they may offend people and they may be overly controlling, or the shadow is that they might actually cause people to kind of retreat into themselves because no one wants to engage them because they're such a tough cookie or such a tough person. And so that's a shadow that they need to be aware of, because if they're not aware of it, the result's quite clear. People aren't going to open up to them. They're not going to want to work with them. And they're probably going to find it quite difficult to work in the context of a team if they don't manage that shadow. Adaptability is next. Adaptability, Georgia, I think a vessel spoke about adaptability, but the shadow here is that they wait for the last minute. They're brilliant when it comes to, change of plans and things changing quickly, unforeseen pressures, changes. But when it comes to getting things done in a systematic and a structured way, or even meeting deadlines, sometimes they can struggle with that. And that's a shadow, because it can cause the team to feel insecure with regards to trusting them with responsibilities. It can cause the team to feel very stressed because things are left for the last minute. And it can cause the team, not to trust them because they just don't enjoy that way of working. So there's an element that adaptability has to manage, the shadow element of the strength. Harmony. This is a great strength. Harmony. These people love teamwork. They love it when people work together. They love it when everyone gets along and when there's a sense of unity in the team. The shadow of harmony is that they don't often say what needs to be said. That's their biggest challenge. Often people need to get given honest feedback, or the team leader needs to be, put in their place, or something tough needs to be brought to the surface. And people with harmony will really struggle to do those things, to say those things, to bring up what needs to be brought up. And so what happens is harmony, which is fake harmony. Harmony is when people don't actually voice what they genuinely feel or experience because they don't want to rock the boat, but actually they're rocking the boat by not saying it, and they're creating fake harmony. And that's a shadow. That's a shadow because it's not moving the team forward. I'm sure you've experienced this. And let me just say, conflict, no one likes conflict. And actually just to say, our next session is going to be conflict in the workplace. And we're going to speak about whether it's a vice or a virtue. Is there a positive to conflict, or is all conflict negative? So just a mental note for next month. That's what the webinar is about. That's we're going to be speaking into some conflict, which is, I think, relevant for all of us. But with harmony, the real challenge is the shadow is not saying what needs to be said. Relator, this is also an interesting one. I have relator. Relators they're very loyal, they're very authentic, they're great people in the sense that they're easy to get along with. They're very open. The challenge is that they can be quite exclusive, and they kind of have their friends, picked out in the team or the business or the organization. And for new people coming in, it can be incredibly challenging to feel part of the team unless the relator kind of cracks the nod and welcomes them in officially. So the shadow for relator is the exclusivity or the clique forming that can slow down the integration of new staff members, for example. There's many other shadows, but I'm only mentioning one for the sake of time. But maybe you struggle with it. Maybe actually you can relate to, enjoying your space and your familiarity and your people. And as soon as someone new comes on the mix, it's quite difficult to welcome them in. If that's the case, you probably have relator, and that's a shadow that you should be aware of. Okay, last two, and then I'm going to wrap us up. The last two I want to speak about is analytical. And analytical is very interesting. It's very similar to another strength called deliberative. But analytical, the strength is these people are very accurate and meticulous in their processing of information. So they really want data and information before they can make a decision. So they love to analyze, they're constantly processing things in their mind, and they don't make quick decisions. Now, the shadow of analytical is that they can become or can come across as quite skeptical. These people can be very skeptical. They can be quite negative. So, Brad was sharing positivity. Brad would probably struggle with someone with analytical, because when a new idea comes up, Brad would say, yes, let's take the mountain. Analytical would say, slow down, give me all the facts and give me time to think about it, and I'll let you know what I think. So they can be more on the skeptical side. They can be more on the negative side. And that's just something that is often a perception-related issue, in that they don't mean to be negative. That's just their natural bend. It's their recurring pattern of thought, feeling, or behavior. But there's a shadow to that, because for people that are coming up with ideas, or for people that, like Brad, who want to take the mountain, people with analytical can kind of crush them a bit if they're not careful with their words and with their response. And so they've got to watch out for that shadow, that they are not casting a shadow on the energy and the positivity and the new ideas that the team members are bringing to the table. And then the last strength I want to just touch on is strategic. So I spoke earlier about, leaders that are making fast decisions. And this is a very, very common strength that has many common shadows. And I see it a lot in business, where you've got your, head of the department, or a manager, or a leader, or even the MD or CEO. And they are great strategists. They figure their way through difficult situations. They always coming up with new plans and kind of new strategies. But the shadow is that they often make decisions on their own, which leaves their management team quite frustrated. The other shadow is that they change the plan very often. They love to change the plan. And so, they'll decide one thing, and not even a month later, the whole direction of the business would have changed because they had a new thought. And so these people can struggle, or people working with these people can struggle to buy into their leadership, because they cast quite an intense shadow. And the shadow is, I'm making a decision without you, or I'm making lots of different decisions all the time, and actually you can't keep up with my decisions. And that's a real shadow. I'm not sure if you've ever experienced leadership like that, but it can be incredibly frustrating when someone says, let's go down this, rabbit trail. And then the next moment, no, we were wrong. We changed in directions. Or people just make calls without consulting the team. So you can see there, the shadow is quite clear. And this just happens to be one of those strengths that fits quite well into the leadership category with regards to, leaders often have it. So what I want to end with, and I'm going to give us about 3 minutes just to kind of reflect on this. But I've mentioned in the beginning that we weren't going to provide answers or solutions. So that's why I said you probably will find this a little frustrating. The goal of today's session was to understand what could be tripping you up and what could be tripping your team up when it comes to your strengths. And whenever it comes to self-development, one of the most important things is self-awareness. Self-awareness is the ability to look at yourself objectively and understand your strengths, your weaknesses, understand what you're good at, what you're not good at, understand how people perceive you, not just how you perceive yourself. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give 2 minutes. I'll mute my mic. I'm going to leave this slide on the screen, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes just to reflect on this question. And if you've got a note pad and a pen, or you can type it on your computer, the question is, what negative or constructive feedback do you receive most often? What negative or constructive feedback do you receive most often? What are you kind of getting told quite regularly, or what feedback do you get quite regularly? And the reason I'm asking you that question is because if you take that, once you've written that answer down and you have your strengths profile, you will most likely be able to pinpoint that feedback to one of your strengths. So someone might say, Georgia, you change your mind all the time. And that's the feedback she gets, let's say, and she writes that down. And I know Georgia's got ideation, and that comes back to ideation. She's coming up with new ideas all the time. So she changes it very often. So that's the sort of exercise I want to lead you guys in. So I'm going to mute my mic now. Take 2 minutes. If you've got questions, post it in the chat, and then I'll wrap us up in 2 minutes. Go for it. Okay. Okay, everyone, it's 1 minute to 4, and we want to make sure we keep it prompt. So that's the end of our session today with regards to the Shadows Your Strengths class. I really hope it was insightful with regards to understanding really the key essence of what most likely is going to trip you up in your leadership. It's not the absence of strengths. It's not what you don't have. It's probably what you have that's overutilized or mismanaged, that's throwing shadows on your own development and your team's development. So I want to just end with some next steps. We didn't get to all of the strengths, but the most practical next step that I can encourage you is individual coaching. OHS, we do coaching with individuals, and we help them develop their leadership and their personal development by helping them channel and manage their strengths more effectively. The other thing I just want to say is we've got a competition on our social media. This might be of interest to some of you. If you go and like and share our posts on our Facebook page, you can win up to 4 assessments and coaching sessions. So yeah, go check it out. You'll see more instructions on our social media, and you'll see kind of how to enter and whatnot, but that's on our social media, on our Facebook and on our Instagram. And then the last one is just the Gallup app. There's a whole bunch of incredible resources that are on the Gallup app. It's called Gallup Access, and you can download it. If you've done the Clifton Strengths Assessment, you can log in with those details, and you'll have a whole bunch of resources that can help you develop and understand your strengths more effectively. Go check us out on social media, purely because our social media is geared towards equipping employees in the workplace with regards to creating high-performing teams and happy work cultures. So go check that out. And that, my friends, is the end of our session. Thanks so much for joining us. If you do have any questions, you can stay on. I'm going to stop screen sharing and check the chat out. But if you do need to go, you can go for it now. And yeah, really appreciate you joining us, and feel free to invite more people in the future. Cheers, everyone.